the left wants to win, we need to unite. This thesis is now widespread doctrine among much of the left. In this regard, even minor criticisms of mistakes and misconceptions that are repeated by popular internet leftists and organizations are spun out into supposedly baseless attacks or attempts to undermine relations between people who seem to be doing the same thing. The moment that the position of some figure on the left movement is subjected to a critical analysis, the cries against sectarianism begin. They will moan over the harm that criticism does and the urgent need for a consolidation of all forces of the left. Such a view towards criticism reveals an utter deficiency in understanding the character and dangers of opportunism. This will not lead to the strengthening or unification of the communists, but instead, as we'll discuss, to ideological confusion, to endless splits which weaken the development of the working class movement and subordinate it to the interests of the bourgeoisie. Many advocates for general reconciliation among leftists favor pluralism, that is, they support the equivalence of varying and even contradictory opinions on the questions of theory and practice. They aren't trying to discern who is right or who stands with the revolutionary position of the proletariat, even on actions that are in the interests of the bourgeoisie. For these left pluralists, all points of view have the right to persist as long as the author credits themselves as a Marxist or a communist or a leftist, depending on how open their pluralism claims to be. They will perceive any criticism as a baseless attack by sectarian dogmatists on the heroes of their movement, whose differences are made to seem insignificant, only applying to this or that issue and cannot be known by outsiders. This is how pseudo-Marxist currents come to obstruct proletarian revolutionism and deny dialectics, as well as currents for certain national movements, Chinese, Korean, etc. Through such contests of differing opinions and approaches, new deviations of Marxism emerge, each one declaring a creative development of the theory and genuine Marxism. The philosophy of the working class, dialectical materialism, asserts that there cannot be many truths. There is always one truth, and this truth is concrete. Pluralism, on the other hand, places truth and falsehood together on the same plane, allowing uncritical reiterations of bourgeois philosophy to lead to the rejection of a class theory, a process of disorganization which leads to the defeat of the working class. There is, and there can be, no middle course in questions of principle. Either one set of principles or another must lie at the basis of the work of the party. A middle course on questions of principle is a course of confusion, a course of concealing differences, a course towards the intellectual death of the party. The policy of finding a middle course on questions of principle is not our policy. The policy of finding a middle course on questions of principle is the policy of declining and degenerating parties. Such a policy cannot but result in the party becoming a mere bureaucratic apparatus beating the air and detached from the masses. Never before has bourgeois pluralism led to the victory of the labor movement, nor to the development of Marxist theory. On the contrary, historical experience shows that parties which refused to fight against opportunistic deviations, and those which deviated from Marxism-Leninism, eventually degenerated and betrayed the interests of the working class. Marxist theory does not develop through compromise, but only through the open struggle against various irreconcilable distortions and deviations. By validating so many contradictory interpretations of Marxism-Leninism from bourgeois or petty bourgeois positions, the opportunists reject the truth and lead workers to a dead end. Another argument of the defenders of pluralism is made by reference to a quote by Lenin from his work Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder, which talks about the possibility of compromise. However, Lenin's real position lies in the ability to distinguish between the forced compromises of necessity from treacherous compromises which embody opportunism and place the working class within a position for defeat. There are different kinds of compromises. One must be able to analyze the situation and the concrete conditions of each compromise, or of each variety of compromise. Of course, in politics, where it is sometimes a matter of extremely complex relations, national and international, between classes and parties, very many cases will arise that will be much more difficult than the question of legitimate compromise in a strike or a treacherous compromise by a strikebreaker, treacherous leader, etc. It would be absurd to formulate a recipe or general rule, no compromises, to suit all cases. One must use one's own brain and be able to find one's bearings in each particular case. In relation to the theory and practice of Marxism-Leninism, pluralism is nothing more than a compromise with bourgeois and petty bourgeois elements and trends. It is a concession to opportunism, which leads us away from the class struggle. The only choice is either bourgeois or socialist ideology. There is no middle course, for mankind has not created a third ideology, and, moreover, in a society torn by class antagonisms, there can never be a non-class or above-class ideology. Hence, to belittle the socialist ideology in any way, to turn aside from it in the slightest degree, means to strengthen bourgeois ideology. History abounds with records of such treacherous agreements made by figures of the communist movement. These include, for example, the betrayal of the working class by the leaders of the Second International in 1914, when they came out in support of the predatory war unleashed by the capitalists. An example of a treacherous compromise to be made today, combined with the refusal to criticize opportunism, could be an association with pseudo-communist parties, a call to go to the polls for its candidates, or an association with liberals to attend their rallies. These programs are only going to be harmful to the development of the working class movement. Of course, there are also forced compromises which are imposed upon true communists by objective circumstances. These have left them no other option, either compromise or die. Such was the conclusion of the Brest-Litovsk peace agreement with Germany, caused by the impossible situation of the Soviet Republic and the threat of its destruction. Imagine that your car is held up by armed bandits. You hand them over your money, passport, revolver, and car. In return, you are rid of the unpleasant company of the bandits. That is unquestionably a compromise. It would, however, be difficult to find a sane man who would declare such a compromise to be inadmissible on principle, or who would call the compromisers an accomplice of the bandits. Our compromise with the bandits of German imperialism was just that kind of compromise. Forced compromises also include, for example, multiple temporary alliances of the Bolsheviks with the social revolutionaries and Mensheviks, which were useful for certain revolutionary goals at certain stages of history. However, no matter what alliances the Bolsheviks concluded with whom, they never deviated from their principled positions on issues of theory and practice, and never, even during their formal party formation with the Mensheviks or in government with the left social revolutionaries, did they stop conducting an ideological and political struggle against them. To carry on a war for the overthrow of the international bourgeoisie, war which is 100 times more difficult, protracted, and complex than the most stubborn of ordinary wars between states, and to renounce in advance any change of tack or any utilization of a conflict of interests, even if temporary, among one's enemies, or any conciliation or compromise with possible allies, even if they are temporary, unstable, vacillating, or conditional allies. Is that not ridiculous in the extreme? It is entirely a matter of knowing how to apply these tactics in order to raise, not lower, the general level of proletarian class consciousness, revolutionary spirit, and ability to fight and win. Almost all practice of the modern left serves as proof of Lenin's position, that criticism and disengagement are the most important means of forming a real communist party and a truly revolutionary workers' movement. In the work What Is to Be Done, which was published just as the issue of an actual unification of the Social Democrats into a party was on the agenda, Lenin wrote, "We revolutionary Social Democrats, on the contrary, are dissatisfied with this worship of spontaneity, i.e., of that which exists at the present moment. We demand that the tactics that have prevailed in recent years be changed. We declare that before we can unite, and in order that we may unite, we must first of all draw firm and definite lines of demarcation." When carefully studying the history of the communist movement, we can see that this problem isn't anything new. At the beginning of the 20th century, those who were transforming Marxism into a reformist liberal trend bannered the slogan of freedom of criticism to the masses, under the guise of which Marxism was disarmed and made into an ordinary movement for improving the economic working conditions of workers. Lenin denounced the so-called economists and demanded a decisive break with them, pointing out that the preservation of the state of things, in which the opportunists can promote their ideas to the masses, deprives the socialist movement of independence and turns it into an appendage of the liberals. Despite the barrage of accusations of schism and dogmatism that Lenin was showered with, first by economists and later by Trotsky and the Mensheviks, it was Lenin's course to rally the most conscious, most advanced workers into a revolutionary proletarian party, and this is the line which turned out to be correct. It was a consistent and clear ideological position, and not conciliationism with the opportunists, that allowed the Bolshevik Party to win the support of the overwhelming majority of the workers. The dialectic of the development of the communist movement is such that it cannot expand by mechanistically joining together heterogeneous elements. The very essence of this movement presupposes its isolation from all sorts of bourgeois trends and forces. The more consistently the communist movement resists bourgeois influence, including the internal influence of opportunists and revisionists, the stronger and more organized it becomes. Advocates of an unprincipled left unity should ask themselves why no country in the world, in all the history of the working class movement, has such an association never led to the fall of the bourgeoisie. Permeated with the petty bourgeois ideology of rivalry and individualism, affected by selfish motives, entangled in opportunism, today's movement of the left is incapable of anything more than a fragile alliance of semi-autonomous activist cells. Ultimately, lone bloggers and other petty bourgeois elements embedded in the system receive direct benefits from the promotion of abstract unification and the harmfulness of criticism of opportunism. Without a real ideological unity and a clear understanding of their own class interests, the workers will remain under the power of the capitalists. Only a disciplined Marxist-Leninist Communist Party can establish this unity, which itself cannot be founded on the shaky ground of conciliationism. Stay tuned.